Thank you, sir, for PTI, talking to PTI, India's largest news agency. It's been 2 days since elections were held. Do you think America today is a divided country, divided into two worldviews?
Well, first, thank you, Manas, and I'm delighted to speak to PTI and to our friends in India. I think not only is America divided between two factions currently, Republican and Democrat, I think within each of those parties, there are very serious fractures that were revealed in this campaign. Let's start with the Democrats. You saw a clear divide between progressives and moderates, and the Republicans exploited that policy fight between the two to paint Kamala Harris as beholden to the progressive element, when in my view, actually, Kamala Harris and the force of the party remains far more on the moderate side. On the Republican side, I think there's a misperception that there is a uniform position around Donald Trump. I think that there are certain consensus positions that the election revealed, a real frustration with certain social policies, certainly a frustration with the economic conditions in America right now. But I think those also masked over pretty significant differences on the Republican side, particularly between those who are true MAGA supporters, who want a more isolationist approach towards American foreign policy, and those who are more traditional Republican foreign policy hawks, who want an interventionist United States, who believe in US leadership. And India, I think, is critical, certainly to the latter group. Remains to be seen what happens with the former group. Bottom line, yeah, I think this election revealed a lot of disagreements among Americans.
Do you think the US will take a different trajectory under Trump 2.0? There have been mounting concerns among different immigrant communities, including Indians, about the possibility of Trump actually implementing the massive immigration policy that under which he promised to, deport a significant number of immigrants who have been staying in the US.
Yeah, well, let me start with the good news first. And the good news is I think Trump 2.0 is going to build on the momentum first created during the Bush administration, sustained during Obama, and then grown under the Trump and Biden administrations for the US India relationship. China, of course, has galvanized the United States to become far more bullish about building the US India relationship. That is not going to change under a Trump administration. I think it's only going to grow. Now, let's be realistic. There are some pretty significant obstacles to that growth. Number one, the legal proceedings that are taking place. Happy to discuss that further. Number two, Trump is going to have a pretty aggressive trade agenda, in my view. And given the trade surplus that exists with India right now, that could unquestionably be a hiccup in the relationship. And three, the US India commercial relationship has had a fair number of fits and starts. I think that there are grand expectations and optimism about that relationship, but there have been a few implementation challenges. But overall, I think the intent is to have a very strong US India relationship. Let's talk about the immigration situation in the United States. I think unquestionably President Trump had a resonant message across the board in multiple states on immigration. I happen to think the Democratic position was misrepresented, but no question, President Trump put a lot of resources into messaging that his opponent was going to be weak on immigration and that the United States needs to have a far more forceful approach. If I were in an immigrant community, I would be concerned that Trump is actually going to follow up on his rhetoric to immediately start deporting uh, illegal aliens here.
So, a number of American economists in the last few days are saying that any mass deportation program, if implemented, could actually impact the American economy. How do you see it?
I see it that 100% it would negatively impact the US economy. I don't think people appreciate the extent to which we rely on immigrant labor in key industries such as dairy for our day-to-day sustenance. I also happen to think that key figures in the Trump administration will understand that and will take a smart approach.
Do you think that Trump's plan to import massive taxes on goods from China will benefit India, or you think Trump could actually impose similar taxes on imports from India as well?
Well, look, I think that Trump has certainly spoken about a universal tax increase across the board that would negatively impact US relations with India and any number of other partners. That said, no question China is the focus of those tariffs. I would expect that India would benefit in some way, but the question is always implementation with India, to what extent you actually can relocate supply chains and take the steps to make India a more prominent part of the US economy.
Do you think under Trump administration, India-U.S. relations will be much of a kind of transactional in hue? Do you think the main negotiations will be on tariffs, immigration, and tax system?
Yeah, Manas, I think it remains to be seen. I think that there are certain anchor principles to the US India relationship that will continue through a Trump administration, regardless of what is happening on any day to day with any day to day events. But that said, Trump is a transactional character, and that's his leadership style. So I would expect a combination of both of sorts, that there will be a transactional element, but I also think that there's going to be a hewing to the core principles that India is a bulwark of U.S. defense.
Do you think the oil prices will moderate under Trump administration and it will benefit many emerging economies, including the Indian economy?
Well, I think that the Biden administration actually brought down oil prices significantly, not just through its domestic policies of finding alternative sources and making sure that the U.S. remains a strong energy producer, but also working closely with our allies in creating energy initiatives and infrastructure initiatives feeding into green energy supplies. I think those initiatives, some with Saudi, some with India, such as the hydrogen corridor that we hope will flow from Delhi to the UAE to Europe, I think those initiatives could very well suffer. So I don't subscribe to the idea that oil prices are immediately going to go down.
How do you see the implementation of, for example, ambitious initiatives like uh, the IMAC and ISAT? These are the two signature initiatives taken during Biden administration. And the overall cooperation in the Indo-Pacific under the framework of Quad. How do you see these three initiatives being implemented under the Trump administration?
Manas, it's interesting that I work with a lot of investors, and I don't think people appreciate the importance of the IMEC. I'm not sure a lot of Americans know what the IMEC is. For foreign policy professionals, I think it is absolutely a critical piece of what the US needs to build to help our allies like India and strengthen ourselves against China. I do fear that because the IMEC was a Biden led initiative, that it doesn't have a sponsor in the Trump administration. So, one of the things that I'd like to see as a foreign policy observer in Washington is for the Trump administration to work closely with the IMEC supporters from the Biden administration and to take it on as its own initiative and build it and make it happen.
So, do you think America First approach of Mr. Biden and Make in India approach of New Delhi will somehow actually clash, and it will impact the overall economic engagement between the two sides?
Yeah, on any given day, and I presume this is the same in India, there is a healthy internal fight among the America First crowd and the economic realists. And I think on paper there's a clash. I think in reality there's a recognition that we need Indians manufacturing as much as India needs the United States. So I think that there's going to be initially a lot of rhetoric and America first slogans being thrown around. I hope that the Trump administration will take a far more pragmatic approach and that the economic realists in the administration will rue the day.
I asked about the Indo-Pacific also under Quad framework. How do you see the cooperation going forward under Quad in Indo-Pacific?
I actually think it's going to be stable. That's one area that I think that there's going to be consistency between the Biden administration and the Trump administration. If anything, I've heard only positive observations from Trump officials about AUKUS and a broader AUKUS, the role of India and the Quad in our defense relationship. I would expect a healthy degree of stability there.
The Panun issue has been a kind of irritant in the India-US relations in the last few months. A lot of people are saying that the relations are under some kind of stress because of the issue. How do you see this issue play out under the Trump administration?
Well, I think on any given day there are stressors in the relationship. Obviously, this incident is a significant one. I think it remains to be seen how these legal proceedings will unfold. I feel pretty confident that even under President Trump, notwithstanding his threats about going after his enemies at DOJ and politicizing the Justice Department, I think the U.S. Prosecution system, the DOJ, will remain at arm's length from political interference, at least initially. We'll see how these proceedings play out, and I think the U.S.-India relationship is stronger than any one incident.
So do you think the Ukraine conflict will come to an end under the Trump administration, and this could actually, in a way, in a greater sense, boost the overall global economic situation?
I like to think that the Trump administration is going to be conflicted about what to do. And I think that there's a healthy conflict between the America First isolationist element of the Republican Party today and those who understand that Ukraine is vital, not just to Europe's defense, but to the United States and our security interests. So I would hope at least that there's not an immediate change in policy. If anything, I would expect a continuation driven in part by Republican national security experts on the Hill, a continuation of U.S. support for Ukraine in the short term.
How do you see the overall shape of the American foreign policy under Mr. Trump, especially for Asia, and more specifically for China?
Yeah, a little more chaotic than I think what we're used to. Look, Mr. Trump is President Trump is he's an interesting personality, and a lot of his foreign policy in the past administration was personality driven, but there were also consistent themes from previous Republican administrations. And I'm an optimist. I'm going to focus on the potential for Trump to stay the course on some key U.S. foreign policy relationships and to maintain key policies, including the defense of Taiwan, defense of Ukraine, and of course, support for our allies in the Middle East.
So one of the finest aspects of India-US relations in the last few years has been the defense cooperation. We have seen a number of big-ticket deals, the last one being the procurement of 31 Predator drones for the Indian Armed Forces. How do you see the defense cooperation going forward?
It's a great question. I actually think that that's going to be one of the bright spots of the U.S.-India partnership, primarily, again, because China is going to be an animating feature, as it has been for the Biden administration, of Trump foreign policy. The question is always the details of these agreements. How do you actually take all of the optimism and the hope and intentions of the U.S.-India relationship and implement these kinds of agreements? I'm hopeful that some smart negotiating on the part of the Trump administration will allow for full implementation of the agreements that have been reached and further growth of the defense relationship.
Last question, in fact, what will be the areas that the Trump administration will focus in ties with India, and how the overall relations will go forward from here?
Well, I think defense is going to be at the top of the list, given that trade is such a sensitive issue. If you were to look at where's the Trump administration looking to get initial wins, I think it's in the trade context. I again hope that the Trump administration is going to see the value of the IMEC initiative, join hands with our G20 partners, and continue to push for significant infrastructure and clean energy developments that are certainly going to benefit India, but even more important, are going to benefit the United States.
And how the friendship between Mr. Modi and Mr. Trump will pan out? I mean, will it just positively impact the relations?
Tell me the question again.
Is the friendship between Mr. Trump and Mr. Narendra Modi, India's Prime Minister, will somehow positively impact the relations?
I think anytime you have two leaders who have a good personal chemistry, it always has a broader positive impact on the bilateral relationship. If anything, it means that when challenges come up, and in the US-India relationship, there are going to be plenty of challenges, to be able to pick up the phone and call a foreign leader and work those out. So I'm actually quite pleased that President Trump has a healthy relationship with Prime Minister Modi.
Thank you so very much for talking to PTI.
Thank you.
Besides bilateral engagement, what are the potential areas that you see in India-US relations in the future?
Well, India is a serious actor now, not just a regional actor, but a global actor. And so an opportunity I see in the Trump administration is to try and bring India closer to our other regional partners in Asia and also in the Middle East. I'd like to see the Trump administration work closely with Israel on energy and defense issues. And to the extent the U.S. continues to draw the Saudis and the Israelis closer together, to think really seriously about how do we leverage U.S.-India relations, close U.S.-Israel relations, to bring all of those countries together for greater stability in the Middle East.
Do you think India can play a role in ensuring better stability in the Middle East?
I do, because I think that there's common ground among the Saudis, Israelis, and Indians, certainly on a security front, but in other areas of cooperation as well, particularly in energy, which again is why I really hope the IMEC is given full life and support in a Trump administration.